Utopia is a culture created by the young, for the young. This means the system is autocratic. It is a system governed by the youth. This does not mean an abuse of others, including the elderly. It means the ones who are doing the actual work and producing the real things the world needs, have the power that represents the level of their contribution. The world has always needed a better way to transfer power. When power is finally transferred from the old to the young, the way it is transferred perpetuates the problem experienced by the previous generation. The youth remain excluded from positions of influence. England had a process used for transferring power, called primogeniture. Everything owned by the father was passed down to the eldest son. Not only did this disinherit other sons and all of the daughters, it perpetuated a system where the youths of the country remained dependents up until the father's death, and beyond if they were daughters or younger sons. Power was transferred, but only to the oldest of the sons. The 1960s experienced something of a reformation. The youth of the baby boom era seemed poised to take power. But they ended up only wanting continuous funding to make possible their entitled lifestyle. It was a culture of perpetual revolution, rebellion and discontent. Adulthood posed a problem for the militant generation. Even if one had communism, one still had to run the government, not to mention clean the streets and wash the clothes. Yet, many still managed to hang on to their ideals and fought incessantly for human rights. To keep themselves busy and engaged, they looked ceaselessly for victims. There was no movement or protest the liberal white youth would not get engaged in. Fighting for rights because their chief occupation. It dominated the universities and came to alter the culture of work. Workers had rights, but more than that, people's other identities gave them other rights. Looking for possible rights and tying them to ever more numerous identity groups became an occupation all on its own. This culminated in the emergence of trans rights. As a new field, it experienced incredible growth during its formative years. However, there were cracks beginning to show in the foundation of these movements. It was a problem that had plagued the civil rights movement from its earliest inception. Fighting for rights was not a going concern. The very nature of the enterprise was predicated on the ability of the victim to gain the favor of the oppressor. This was not only inherently irrational, but it supposed that if it succeeded, the victim-slash-oppressor relationship would no longer exist. But the existence of this dynamic was essential to the success of the movement. We need to understand the thread that runs through this history and beyond. The key element of human history is a war between good and evil. If we cannot see this, we will never understand human history, where it is going, or where it will end up. For this is an end to history, there is a culmination of events that must inevitably end with the victory of good over evil. Obviously, this is a Christian message, but the argument is not predicated on Christianity. The dynamic is logically necessary. If there was no God, there would need to be a God for existence to exist. This is not an argument that limits God. God could make some other absolute necessity be true, but for humans, we cannot think or imagine existence without good and evil and God and the eventual success of good. If we do not see this, we do not think or do not think logically, and this means our worldview is inherently flawed, being rife with contradictions. But the argument is predicated on there being a good and an evil and the two being differentiable one from the other. This means absolutes are existentially inevitable. Relativity, especially cultural relativity, is an impossible conception. This position has been rendered untenable by generations brought up under liberalism. Logic itself has become untenable because it forces any thinking person into a position freedom-loving liberals cannot entertain. The choice is logic or liberalism, and liberals choose freedom over the structured thought necessitated by logic. However, liberalism only exists if we so love freedom, we permit contradiction to persist, for liberalism contains many contradictory elements. If cultural relativity is accepted as being a valid position, then why is there culture? If all cultures are equal, then no culture is a perfectly valid option. And if all cultures are the same, on what basis does not choose one over the other? Indeed, to say one likes one's culture more than the others, is to make an absurd claim. There is, according to cultural relativism, absolutely no basis on which to base such a claim. However, we all know there are differences between cultures. Even if we wish to argue that one some higher plane of virtue, all cultures are equally valid. Yet, it is to Western nations that all other nations, cultures, and people come. So those who are from other cultures do not seem to have any difficulty discerning which nations have the better culture. That being said, what makes a better culture, better? What makes some places worse than others? There is, we have said, good and evil. We cannot entertain the idea of better and best unless there is a good and evil on which to rate cultures and human behaviors. To do nothing cannot be good. To do evil cannot be good. Such things simply do not fit the meaning of the word. Which means we have some standard by which we rate what is good and what fails to meet the standard. That which is good has value. But little in the natural world has value without human intervention. In other words, value is something added to what might be good, in a metaphysical sense, to give it more usefulness to mankind. Doing good is adding value to the natural things of the world. It is a simple matter to then suppose that to do evil is to destroy what has value. In so doing we destroy the work that others do. Our purpose in life is to create value for the world. We bear fruit by the works that we do. This is why Jesus tells us that by their fruits are they known. Good persons bring forth good fruits while the evil bring forth bad fruits, or the destruction of what others had brought forth. Evil is parasitism. All acts of evil consist in someone taking what others produced, without compensation or agreement. Utopia is a place without parasites. The older generations are locked in parasitic relationships which they are largely unable to extricate themselves from. Youth have little or nothing and are rarely in a position to be parasites and succeed. Some are, but they are usually living in their parents' basement or on the street. At the same time, it is almost impossible for youths to get ahead because of the level of parasitism they must face. It's not that youths are uniquely immune from the ravages of parasitic ideas, they are not given the opportunity to engage in the practice as much as previous generations were. Indeed, the solution to gerontocracy, the rule of the aged, is simply to put an end to parasitism. This is another way of saying Youtocracy means everyone makes it on their own merits and no one lives off of past achievements. This means no one lives off of the labor of someone else. To create a youth movement, you need youth, and that is all. Any group of persons can initiate the process using what they have, intellectually and materially. Progress begins from where you are. If parasitism is exploiting others, then absolutism is adding real value. What is needed and what is missing from present cultures is an accounting. This is why it is possible for others to exploit you. If what they did and what you did was properly measured, you would likely receive more remuneration. At least you could not be exploited for the good of a parasitic system. Neither capitalism nor communism have a right to exist by exploiting you or others like you. This perspective has been missing from the conversation. We might say it is unfortunate that the young have no jobs and unpayable mountains of debt. But your plight is not viewed much differently than the plight of people whose gardens are wiped out by a late spring frost. Unemployment is not a natural disaster or even a natural inconvenience. Unemployment is a calculated policy designed to shift power back into the hands of the upper echelons. Too high a level of employment translates into worker unrest and higher wage demands, and the upper echelons of society find such things distressing. So, prices are increased, interest rates are increased, and loans are made difficult to get. These and other responses put an upward pressure on prices and a contraction in hiring. The young are always the last hired and the first fired. They are the cannon fodder of the economy as well as during wars. They are expendable because they do not have the money and time invested in them that the older workers do. The question we as a society ought to ask is if those who have capital are the ones who ought to define where the moral fulcrum is to be placed. Is knowing how to get rich a prerequisite for deciding moral questions? Who gave the state the right to make the young, society's scapegoat? Utopia gives young adults a way to escape being made the fall guy for every economic downturn that occurs in the West. An activity card is a record of the time we spent helping one another. A small group is formed. This is your home group. A chairperson is selected and issues each member a time card. Whenever one person helps another, whenever you help or are helped, the time consumed is recorded on the card of the helper and on the card of the helpee. This is called cash accounting as it records debits and credits. Thus, every transaction is recorded twice. That is all it takes to begin the process of generating a sustainable and stable economy that is not impacted by downturns or layoffs. Previous generations cannot exploit later ones. There is always someone to help and someone who needs help. As time goes by, and as more and more people join the Utopia youth group, the more services and goods will be made available. The unit of account is time. If you give an hour, you get an hour. It is that simple. The credit and debts are both recorded, giving a reliable system of accounts. The person who credits another with time, owes this time to the Utopians. If you give you get, and if you get, then you are expected to give. The chairperson is responsible for accounts that become imbalanced and for finding ways to balance the accounts of members. New home groups are set up as new members join. Because power is in the hands of those who produce real wealth, power is primarily in the hands of the youth. As it will be found, generally it is the youth who do most of the real work in a community. Those who do the work not only get to eat, but get to exercise real power.